Okay, can everybody hear me all right? Sounds loud to me up here. I'm going to move this down just a little bit. Everybody still hear me? Great. Well, my name is Bill Frauenheim. I'm one of the cardiologists in town, and I'd like to start by just welcoming everyone here. It's great to see such an excellent turnout for my talk. That's something you always like to see when you're standing up here and you spend a lot of time preparing something. Today is a big day, and not just because of this talk. Today's a big day for the cardiologists in town because we started our move into our brand new office today, and our new office is opening on Monday for patients. So I don't know how many of you know that. There's been it's been in the paper a lot, but this new space represents a really, I think, tremendous collaboration between Holland Hospital, West Michigan Heart, Cardiologist, and Spectrum. And what it does is it gives us an opportunity to really not only expand the space, which we needed to expand, but also to use that space to expand services. So we're bringing in a vascular surgeon now from Grand Rapids who'll be working out of that space. It's going to give us a chance to work more efficiently because now we're tied into the hospital where we oversee patient care and have to respond to emergencies. And we see this new space as really hopefully the hub of cardiac care on the lakeshore. And it gives us a platform to grow. So we're really excited about that. We think through increased program expansion, efficiency, quality will improve. So it's something that we hope you'll all appreciate if you do have to come into those doors. Now, hopefully that you're not going to have to come in because we're going to talk today about staying healthy and staying out of the cardiology office through a heart-healthy diet. All right, now, it is amazing how much diet contributes to disease in this country. And I think it's probably underappreciated. So 3/4, as this slide shows, 3/4 of the cost of care in the U.S. is spent on chronic diseases like high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, obesity, and diet is a major contributor to all of these diseases. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about how traditional dietary guidelines have really contributed in part to the problem of obesity and the increase in some of these diseases. We're then going to talk about current guidelines briefly, which in some cases are still lacking. And then we're going to make some recommendations on heart-healthy things to eat and things not to eat. So this is, to me, this is the most important kind of talk I give. I'm in the office all day handing out medications and treating disease after it's already established. Well, I think I can be much more effective telling people and talking about prevention of disease. And I think we can all do a lot more for ourselves with diet and lifestyle than we can with all the medications that I have available to me. So this is really where the emphasis needs to be. Now, I'm a cardiologist, so I'm not a diet expert, but this guy is. And I don't know if anybody has heard of Walter Willett. Anybody heard of him? Well, he is one of the most famous nutritionists in the world. And he is the head of the Harvard School of Nutrition. He has published over 1,100 articles, and they say he's one of the top 5 cited authors of all time. Written 5 books. And the amazing thing about Walter here is that he is from Hart, Michigan. Population 2,100, right there between Pentwater and Shelby. So he's a homeboy. I mean, this is a local guy. Now, he started off slow at Michigan State. So, sorry. So that's where he got his undergrad. He took a big step up when he went to medical school at the University of Michigan, which is my alma mater. He took a small step backward then when he got a PhD at Harvard, and he has been at Harvard ever since. But when it comes to diet, and then, you know, it's kind of schools of thought. You have different people touting different approaches. Most of the stuff I'm going to talk about today reflects Walter Willette's thinking, and this is what I buy into. There is no conflict of interest here. This is just a PhD who does research, who has no secondary gain, no ties to industry, which is a huge thing when you're talking about diet. So let's just go back for a minute to a guy named Ancel Keys. So Ancel Keys was a pretty famous nutritionist, and in 1958 he started studying the effect of diet on heart disease. And the way that he did it is he took 7 countries, okay, and he looked at what they ate, and he followed them for 15 years. And in fact, he's still following them. And what he showed is, as the saturated fat intake went up, the risk of heart disease went right up along with it. So the more fat in the diet, the higher the risk of heart disease. So the lowest risk countries are Japan and the Mediterranean, and the highest risk up here is the US and Finland. Okay, and the US and Finland had 10 times the rate of heart disease as these low-fat countries. In Finland is the worst. That's the dot that's almost off the chart. In Finland, they spread butter on their cheese. They really do. It is a very high-fat diet. And so this guy was famous. This is the cover of Time magazine in 1961. And this really started this low-fat hypothesis. Ancel Keys is also well known because he developed the K ration for the military. Okay, and he named it after himself. And he actually, he was a proponent of this Mediterranean diet. He moved to Italy, and he lived to be 100. And he just died in 2004, I believe it was. So kind of a one-man study on the benefit of a lower fat diet. Now, this low-fat hypothesis got kicked off, so in the 70s. This is the food group at that time. You know, this is what I grew up with, the 4 basic food groups. This is what I got taught in elementary school. And the 4 basic food groups, I think the message there was just eat something from each of these 4 basic groups with every meal. It didn't say eat a lot of one or a little of another. It just said these are the kind of 4 basic food groups, and just eat some of each. I'm sure most people in this room are very familiar with this 4 basic food groups from back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. But with the Ancel Keys data, this changed. And what it turned into was this food pyramid. All right, and this food pyramid came out in 1992, and this is where things started to go wrong. Okay, because what the food pyramid did, because it was emphasizing low fat, it took the bottom of the pyramid and it turned it into starch. And it said we need to be eating 6 to 11 servings of starch a day. And this is the main food group. Now, starch wasn't defined. This was like Wonder Bread, Rice Krispies, sugar cereal. That's the stuff that I actually grew up with too, right? Frosted Flakes. I grew up eating cereal I wouldn't let my kids go near right now. That's why my daughter, Katie, right here, is a lot fitter than I was when in a runner, and I was just, the average Joe. So the base of the pyramid was starch. Another problem with this pyramid is that vegetables weren't really well specified. They weren't spelled out. Potatoes were considered a vegetable. All right? They lumped protein into one small group, and they included red meat, fish, poultry, with no distinction between them. And finally, a couple of things. Dairy, 2 to 3 servings a day, was still a lot of dairy in this pyramid. And then at the top, They took fats, oils, and sweets, and they said just use them sparingly. So the fats, many of which we now believe contain healthy oils, omega-3 oils. Some of these fats are mainstays of the Mediterranean diet, were to be avoided. So when this pyramid came out, it led to kind of a re-engineering of what we ate. Okay, this low fat started to be the mantra, and we started to associate low fat with health, and the industry kind of re-engineered foods. All right, and now they started coming out with these low fat, low cholesterol products which were supposed to be healthy. So you can see these labels on things like these Eggo waffles, Frosted Flakes, and these would have fallen into that big starch category. What made it worse was that there was no real control over labeling. Okay, labeling wasn't regulated. You could make claims without much oversight. So even Twinkies had a low-fat label, and as you can see right here, a nice heart right on them, implying because they're low-fat, they're healthy. I ate a lot of Twinkies too when I was a kid. But we thought we did not really understand at the time. The American Heart Association, our agency, our main body hasn't really helped because they have their own heart stamp, but what they do is they sell it. All right, so if you want to buy their heart stamp and put it on their product, you can. And so Sara Lee bought this stamp in 2013, and they put it on 30 of their meats, including prepared lunch meats and things which many people now recognize as not heart healthy at all. And the way they justified this, they said it's low fat, but it did not consider any added sugars. It did not consider whole grains. It allowed trans fats and a lot of salt. In every 2-ounce serving, you could have 480 milligrams of sodium. So what we're selling as heart healthy, even the American Heart Association, we would say in retrospect, not heart healthy at all. So what happened to the country when this hypothesis and food plate came out? Well, on this side, you can see what happened is that the public listened, and the amount of carbohydrates we ate went up. And that's that red line right here. That's carbohydrate intake from 1976 until now. So everybody increased their carbs. They decreased their fat. That's the yellow line. So fat intake went down. We did what we were supposed to do. Protein stayed the same. And on the left, you'll see what happened to weight. Starting at the same time, 1976, is when obesity rates started to increase exponentially. And now rates of obesity are over 60%. So, I would say, and Walter Willett would say, that this diet and this dietary advice, now in retrospect, reflects failed dietary policy. So it was refined, okay, and this is the current version of the USDA recommended guideline, which is called My Plate. And My Plate is quite a bit better. Okay, it emphasizes fruits and vegetables on the one hand, more fruits, more vegetables. It talks about less refined grains, and it talks about healthy fats. It talks about limiting sugar and limiting calorie intake, but this falls short as well. And a couple ways it falls short is here in the protein part of this plate. Again, there's no distinction between red meat, fish, nuts, beans. They're all kind of lumped together. In the grain section, there's no real depiction of whole grains versus refined grains. They recommend dairy with every meal, which is something that's quite controversial. So when this came out in 2010, it was also met with a lot of criticism, and it was very controversial. And it rose to the level where Walter Willett published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is our most prestigious medical journal. In the New England Journal of Medicine, he published a critique of this, and he said these guidelines, he questioned the validity of these guidelines. Carbohydrates and this many proteins, this many fats, but people don't think like that. People think in terms of like food, you know, what kind of food to eat. And he thought these guidelines were obscured. And one of the reasons that he thought these guidelines in 2010 were obscured is because the USDA has so much conflict of interest. So the USDA, who makes the guidelines, has spent $246 billion supporting commodities for the dairy and meat industry. Okay, and the committee that makes the guidelines has members from the dairy and meat industry on it. And so you can't regulate and promote at the same time. So that's his take. Too much conflict of interest. The USDA was sued because of what they said was a lack of disclosure, and that suit was actually won. This was Physicians for Responsible Medicine, and they were forced to disclose the conflict of interest on the Dietary Committee. And so now there's a call for revision. People want these dietary guidelines taken away from the USDA, which promotes the promotion agency, and they want them given to a neutral agency, like the Institute of Medicine or the Center for Disease Control. So we'll see what happens with that. So this is the kind of thing that came out at the time. The new dietary guidelines have been released. They tell us to eat healthier, but not so healthy as to noticeably affect any corporate profits. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So we can do better than that. And what one of his criticisms, Walter Willett's, is that we're not telling people what not to eat. Let's just talk about what not to eat and not just macronutrients. So now we're going to talk about a few things not to eat. Okay? So number one, eat less added sugar. Okay, so added sugar is 16% of the calories in the U.S. diet. 16%. This is not natural sugar. This is stuff we put in the food. It's things like sucrose, which is table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, which is in everything that's processed almost, corn syrup. And this is worse than just, we used to say it's just empty calories. Just, it's not good for you, but it doesn't hurt you. But now we think this is worse than empty calories because it contributes to weight gain, diabetes, and heart disease. So if you eat sugar, it stimulates insulin production in the pancreas, and insulin production stimulates hunger. Insulin production contributes to diabetes, and so we think these added sugars are a major problem. So, sources of added sugars. Anybody want to guess what the number one source of added sugars is in the American diet? 30%, yeah. Okay, so we got a soda pop. Cereal. Okay, we're going to do this like Family Feud. You guys know Family Feud? We got soda pop, cereal. Anybody? Those are both great guesses. Anybody else? I have four things, the four leading causes. Candy and bread. Boy, you guys are, why am I even giving this talk? Number one is soda. 35.7% of the added calories in our diet comes from soda and high energy sports drinks. These are the Powerades, Gatorades, and things like that. Number two, grain-based desserts. Okay, so we all know what grain-based desserts are because most of us eat them. That's 12.9% of the added sugars in our diet. Fruit juice, number three, 10.5%. Many people think fruit juice is healthy, and the more juice I drink, the better. Well, fruit juice is loaded with sugar, and many types of fruit juice have as much sugar in them as pop. Fresh fruit is healthy. Fruit juice is not. It is a source of vitamin C, so there's some benefit, but the sugar counters the benefit. And then there's candy, 6.1%. So if you just eliminated these things from your regular diet, you would be eliminating 70% of the added sugars from your diet. These simple things. Well, we always talk moderation. So here's something on soda. 2 out of 3 Americans drink some kind of pop every day. And if you do drink 1 soda a day, this article that just came out a couple years ago says your risk of heart disease will go up 20%. 20% just drinking 1 soda per day.
Is it based on age?
On age? Well, it's a percent, so your risk is going to be lower as you're younger. So the 20% increase is still there, but it's just a much smaller increase based on age. So there doesn't seem to be an increased risk with artificially sweetened beverages, but artificially sweetened beverages we're not really recommending either, because what they do is they kind of continue that urge for sweets by substituting something else, and we really don't know how safe they are because they haven't been studied. So we're not really promoting artificial sweetened beverages. They tell the doctors, they're telling us when we see a cardiac heart patient in our office, there's 3 questions we should ask them: smoking, alcohol, and soda. Okay, because it's that big of a deal. If you drank, this is another interesting way to look at it, if you drank 1 20-ounce Mountain Dew per day, that would translate into 30 pounds a year. 30 pounds. So if you want to lose 30 pounds a year, just stop drinking that Mountain Dew. Okay, so that's number 1, less sugar. Number 2, eat less solid fats. Okay, solid fats are 19% of the calories in the diet. So solid fats and sugars are 35% of the calories in our diet. Solid fats, which we'll talk about a little more in a minute what they are, they have very few essential nutrients, and there's no dietary fiber in solid fats. Okay, so there's not a lot of nutritional value in solid fats. One of the key messages is they talk about fats, we're talking not about all fats, okay, because some fats seem to be protective and some fats seem to be harmful. So solid fats are saturated fats. They're right here. And they're solid, what that means is at room temperature, they would turn to solid. Okay, they would turn into a big hunk of lard. And if you're eating a lot of solid fats, your body is at room temperature, so they're not going to turn into a big hunk of lard in your body, but they're going to thicken and clog things up. The vast majority of these solid fats come from animal products. They increase the risk of heart disease. Now, liquid fats are called unsaturated fats. And these are the fats that come from plants and in some cases fish. So these unsaturated fats are liquids at room temperature, and they actually seem to be protective. So, omega-3 fatty acids. That's a classic, protective fatty acid that comes in from fish and plants. Omega-6 fatty acids comes from plants. So we have the good fats and the bad fats, and we want to limit the bad fats, the solid fats. So what are the main sources? Do we need to cut down? So what are the main sources of these solid fats in the diet? Does anybody want to guess what number 1 is? Salt. Okay, what else? Butter. So we're going to classify that as dairy. Meat. Okay, that's all good guesses. The number 1 contributor of saturated fat is dairy. 30%, greater than 30% of the saturated fat in the diet comes from dairy. Now, we grew up thinking, oh, geez, milk is good. That's why the food plate has milk at every meal and 2 to 3 servings a day. Well, now we think milk is not so good, okay, because milk is a huge source of saturated fat. So a limited amount of low-fat milk is okay, as we'll get to, but it's not something we're pushing. We're not pushing, these dairy products. People say, well, what about vitamin D? We need vitamin D for our bones. Well, it turns out it's kind of a paradox. The countries that take in the most milk have the highest risk of fractures. Okay, and you get lots of vitamin D through other sources too, plant sources too. Of this dairy, let's see, I think, pizza is one of the top 2 sources of cheese in our diet. So some of this is not just eating cheese, it's eating something like pizza. The number 2 cause of these solid fats, contributing to these solid fats, is meat. So meat contributes 15% of the solid fats in our diet. And then there's ice cream. I know.
Be careful.
I said the same thing. Ice cream, boy. But 5.6% of the saturated fat in our diet comes from ice cream. Now, this hit home for me because, we have some of the best ice cream in the country right here in Holland, Hudsonville. And my wife, in one of these fundraisers in town, won one of these Hudsonville raffle things. And so what that means is we won 4 half-gallons of ice cream a month for a year. And a tour of the factory. And I have to say, my ice cream consumption for that year went way up. And I enjoyed every bite. So this was my cholesterol before my wife started feeding me the ice cream. Right, I'm blaming my wife. But my total cholesterol was 191, and my LDL was 127. So then I measured my cholesterol after a year. My total cholesterol was 234, and worse, my LDL went from 127 to 163. So that's just a kind of a personal experiment with what dairy, one type of dairy can do to your cholesterol. Well, I had help. I'm the only one that measured my cholesterol, though. So when we talked before about how protein is just lumped into a section of my plate, and they don't distinguish different kinds of protein. Now I know this is a hard slide to look at, but I left it in because I think it's so illustrative. This shows you what happens when you substitute one source of protein for a different source of protein. Okay, and this line would be, if you substituted fish for meat and it was on the line, there'd be no difference. This is decreased risk of heart disease. Okay, this is all talks about heart disease. So if you make a substitution, this is decreased risk, and this is increased risk. So how do you decrease your risk of heart disease? You substitute anything for red meat. If you substitute beans for red meat, that's the largest decrease in your risk of heart disease. Nuts for red meat, fish, or poultry. Okay, so these are the major sources of protein in the diet, and anything you substitute for red meat is going to have a major impact on your risk of heart disease. If you, then the most beneficial things are beans and nuts. These are major components of the Mediterranean diet. So if you substitute beans for poultry, your risk is going to go down. Nuts for poultry, your risk is going to go down. So poultry is better than meat, but there are other things even better than poultry. Okay, so this is low-fat dairy for red meat. You're going to get a benefit from that. Anything for red meat is going to have a benefit. If you substitute fish for poultry, you're going to get a benefit. So fish is better than poultry, is better than red meat. And then if you start going the other way, you're going to start increasing your risk. For example, if you take in more high-fat dairy, then for fish, if you substitute that, your risk is going to go up. So really, this slide is just meant to show you that protein is not the same, and if we substitute healthy proteins for less healthy proteins, it's going to have a major effect on our risk of heart disease. So this is about a 30% decreased risk substituting beans for red meat. 30% decreased risk.
Is that related to the fat content of those other foods, or is that totally separate?
Well, it's related to the, I think, harmful effects of solid fats in the meat, and then it's also related to some of the protective effects of good things in the beans. So beans have a lot of fiber. Fiber lowers your risk of heart disease. Meat has no fiber. Beans, as a plant product, has a lot of these phytochemicals, which contain antioxidants. Okay, so there's just a lot of healthy things that are part of the benefit, and unhealthy things in meat that are another part of the benefit. It's kind of a double whammy.
Would you explain beans?
Pardon me?
Would you explain beans?
So beans are, you mean what kinds of beans?
Green beans or red beans?
No, these are like kidney beans, navy beans, black beans, red beans, kind of the beans that go in chili and that kind of thing. Beans, I think it was the USDA, they took the 100 foods with the highest content of antioxidants and rated them 1 through 100, and beans were 3 out of the first 4. So a lot of protective effects. Here's another reason. Oh, yeah? What do you think, Jane? Oh, I'm just kidding. That's my wife. She knows as much or more about diet than I do. Yeah, no, I don't see soybeans on the typical list. It's right. So also I think healthy and a lot of benefits to that, but and some similar benefits, but they're not classified in that same category as beans. So here's another reason to eat less meat. Now this, we're not going to look at this, but I wanted to point out that this is from the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research. So this is their like major publication. And what they say is that there's convincing evidence, if you look all the way over here, that red meat increases the risk of colon cancer and rectal cancer. So increased colorectal cancer with red meat, and with processed meat, the same. If you look at what's suggestive but not proven yet, red meat, there's suggestive evidence that red meat increases the risk of esophageal cancer, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, endometrial cancer, and processed meat similarly. So if you're not going to eat less meat for your heart, then another reason to eat less meat would be to decrease your risk of cancer. Here's another reason to eat less red meat. So this is for the green people in the audience. This has to do with the effects on the climate of eating different kinds of foods, and it's translated into how many kilometers you would drive in a car. Okay, so and one is organic and one's conventional. But if we just look at conventional farming, and if you're a vegan, that has about the effect of driving 629 kilometers a year. That's the effect on the environment. If you're a vegetarian, it has the effect of driving 2,400 kilometers a year because you're adding milk and dairy. If you include meat, it has the effect of driving 4,700 kilometers a year on the environment. Now those numbers are, it's like, well, what does that really mean? Well, I thought this was fascinating because this top thing article was from the Los Angeles Times. So this This is an article from 2005. The San Joaquin Valley is the dirtiest place in the country. Okay, it has the dirtiest air in the country. And on Monday in 2005, their officials said most of the smog came from cows, not cars. Every year, a cow produces 19.3 pounds of gas. Which if you think how, I mean, if you think how much gas weighs, it's not very much, so that's a lot of gas. So that led to this comic, which I thought was kind of reflective of that. Okay, so that was number 2, less solid fats. Number 3, eat less refined grains. All right, so we'll talk about refining, but what refining does when you refine a grain is it takes out most of the vitamins, it takes out all the fiber from the grain. It's done because refining makes food easier to chew. It's easier to digest. It keeps longer on the shelf without refrigeration. So there's a big impetus to refine grain because we've asked for it. We currently consume 200%, twice as much of the refined grains as the goal, and we only eat about 15% of the whole grains. Okay, so there's a big mismatch between the amount of refined and the amount of whole grains. Now this just shows you what a grain kernel looks like. Okay, there's 3 components to grain, to a whole grain. There's the bran, which is the outside layer. The bran is filled with good stuff. It's most of the fiber. It's a lot of the vitamins. It's gone when we refine. There's the germ, okay, which is also filled with good stuff. The germ is the greatest source of B vitamins. It has fiber, iron. It has these phytochemicals we talked about, antioxidants. It lowers the risk of heart disease and cancer. It's also stripped away. So what we do when we refine grain is we strip away this, we grind it up, and we feed it to the cows. You know, and the cows are eating all these great nutritious components of grain, and we take the middle, which is the source of white flour, and we feed it to ourselves. All right, yeah, it's a complete paradox. So few of the vitamins, a little bit of the fiber, and lots of starch. Okay, and starch is sugars in chains. And starch is sugars in chains that can get digested. Fiber is sugar in chains that is not digested. Okay, so there's a huge difference between fiber, which is good for you, and starch, which is bad for you. So starch gets turned into glucose in the blood, causes the same effect as sugar in the blood. So that's what we get when we refine flour. Okay, so food sources of refined grains. Anybody want to take a stab at this one? Okay, I have 3. Bread. Okay, that's going to be a big one. Cereals. Okay, let's start with those 2. Bread. 25.9% of the refined grains are in bread. Okay, so this is the Wonder Bread that I grew up with and a lot of the white bread that's out there. Pizza. Pizza has a lot, pizza's high on the list of everything bad. Sorry. Cheese. Refined grains. So pizza is the 2nd largest cause. And the 3rd, again, is grain-based desserts. Okay, so decreasing or eliminating refined grains from these 3 things is 50% of the refined grains in the diet. Here's just some of the benefits of whole grains. Okay, whole grains lower the risk of heart disease. All right, this is well accepted. If you increase your whole grain intake, your risk of dying from heart disease goes down 20% in this study. And that's 1 bowl of whole grain cereal every day. It decreases blood pressure. Okay, so whole grains decrease blood pressure. It enabled 73% of people with high blood pressure to decrease their medication. they increase their whole grains. And number 3, saves lives. Older women who ate whole grains had a lower risk of death. So lots of benefits associated with eating more whole grains. Okay, the last one is eat less salt. Okay, salt is like the key, I think it's the current culprit. It's the one everybody's really, it's the bandwagon right now. So we average 3,400 milligrams of salt in our diet every day. 3,400 milligrams. And the goal for most of us is 1,500 milligrams. So if you're over age 50, if you have high blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, African American, your goal is less than 1,500 milligrams a day. So the average American is getting twice what is recommended. Salt it just does a lot of bad things. It increases blood pressure, stroke risk, heart failure, heart disease, CHD. This is just chronic heart disease. Stomach cancer, osteoporosis. Salt does a lot of bad things. And the problem is that salt is kind of protected. Okay, it's protected because in 1958, when we established a Food Additive Act, we designated a bunch of different substances as additives. We designated a bunch of different food additives with what's called a GRAS designation, generally regarded as safe, which means in 1958, we didn't think salt caused a problem. And so it got this designation, and now it's not regulated. There's no limits on it, okay? And it's in everything. All right, so I couldn't do, like the top 3 sources of salt because salt is in everything. And if you look, it's endemic. It's a public health problem. Salt is in fresh meat. Okay, they inject salt into red meat to increase the weight of the meat and to increase the moisture content. But if you did take the biggest 3, it would be breads, some mixed chicken dishes, and number 3, pizza. Pizza on every list. The thing about salt is that 75% of salt is from processed foods. It's all from processed foods. We put it in, when we process foods. The top 500 sources of salt in our diet are all processed foods. It's everything that's processed. And so that's why, one of the things we emphasize is less processed foods. Because when food is processed, it gets very unhealthy. And salt's one of the reasons. Now, Katie, over here in the corner, giving me a really bad look right now. Her favorite restaurant, my daughter, who's 12, her favorite restaurant is the Olive Garden. Okay, so if you look at the salt in meals at the Olive Garden, I think you would probably find it's a lot more than you would think. So the goal is 1,500 milligrams a day. Up here on the top, if you get this lasagna with a fresh salad, 1 breadstick, and a Coke, you're going to get 6,100 milligrams of salt. 6,100. Spaghetti with a fresh salad and a Sprite, 5,000 milligrams of salt, etc. They do have a low sodium option, okay, a low salt option. That's salmon, soup, tea, and a breadstick. That has 1,800 milligrams of salt. That has more salt than you should have the entire day. Okay, and that's their low salt option. So this is a problem with processed foods, and it's a huge problem with restaurant foods. Okay, and why is it a big deal that restaurant foods have a lot of salt? Well, restaurant foods have a lot of other bad things in them too. When we eat out, it's not just salt; it's increased calories, saturated fats, cholesterol. And we've seen a huge change in our eating habits over the years because now we eat out a lot more than we used to. So this shows eating out, they call that food away from home. That's the FH, food away from home. In 1962, This is the percent of calories people got. It was like 8% food away from home, and now it's gone way up. Sorry, this is money spent, but people are eating out far more than they used to, and that's another reason why our diets are not as healthy as they used to be. So the Institute of Medicine, because the FDA isn't regulating salt, they gave it this GRAS recommendation. Congress said this is a major problem for our country. And they went to the Institute of Medicine and they said, draft recommendations. Okay, give us recommendations on how to decrease salt. And this is what the Institute of Medicine said when they published this manuscript recently. They said if we cut our salt intake by 1,200, so from 3,400 down to 2,200, then we would prevent 120,000 new cases of heart disease a year. 120,000, and save up to 92,000 lives and save $24 billion in healthcare costs. So this isn't some blogger, making these numbers up. I mean, this is a really, I think, trusted organization. They said the FDA needs to set national standards for the addition of sodium to processed and prepared foods. They need to get rid of the generally regarded as safe designation, or at least modify it. And we need to start decreasing. Everyone needs to do it, because it can't be done just by one, company or another, because salt adds flavor. We have to change our palate so that we don't crave as much salt in the food. So it has to be done on a national level. It has to be done all together. And they say over time, we won't crave as much food, as much salt. But there are populations that take in as little as like 700 milligrams of salt a year, 700. And their risk of high blood pressure and heart disease is tremendously low. So it can be done. So what is the best diet? Well, this is part of the problem here too, is that it gets so confusing because everybody's trying to sell their diet as the best diet. And so which one is right, which one is the best? Every single person here is making money or trying to make money selling their book. So they have to come up with a new angle or a new approach. And that's not what we need. What we need is just good basic advice. So we come back to Walter Willett. Oh geez, you know what I have to do? I have to go through all that stuff again. We'll pause there just for a minute. And he on his, Harvard has a phenomenal website. It's called the nutritionsource.org. Okay, and anybody who's looking for more information, I would encourage you to go to this website, the nutritionsource.org. And on the first page, he tells us what's wrong with my plate and says this is the plate. This is the plate that he thinks is much more informative, okay, in terms of telling us what we should be eating. Okay, so we'll just start here. Plenty of fruits of all colors. Okay, so you really can't go wrong eating fruit. The more veggies and the greater variety, the better. You can't go wrong eating veggies. Okay, so when people come into me, I say, the more fruit you eat, the more veggies you eat, the better. They say, what can I eat? I can't eat anything. He argues this is a diet of abundance. There's all kinds of things that you can eat. This is not a diet of restriction. Unlike the USDA, he encourages, and this is the Mediterranean diet, he encourages the use of these healthy oils. This is like olive oil, canola oil. Okay, use them for cooking, use them on salad, use them instead of butter. Okay, because these oils will protect your heart. He takes away the milk because dairy, the effect of dairy is contributing to saturated fats is potentially detrimental. He doesn't say don't drink any milk. He says just limit milk and dairy. milk and dairy, 1 to 2 servings a day. He takes the grains and he turns it into whole grains. Okay, and he says you eat whole grains, brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole grain pasta, and you limit the refined grains. The USDA has gotten on board with the grains, and now they say that 51% of our grains should be whole grains, at least half the grains. So since I showed you 2010, they have amended that. And then he doesn't just talk about protein, he talks about healthy proteins. Okay, so he does differentiate between red meat, poultry, fish. So what he says is choose fish, poultry, beans, and nuts. Limit red meat. Avoid bacon. Avoid cold cuts, processed meat, and cold cuts and other processed meats. Okay, so that's his kind of simple depiction. Now, when this came out, I think this has been out a couple of years. You know, there's still, you know, there's different people who have different beliefs on diet. You know, some people don't like the Mediterranean diet. They like the, you know, the Dean Ornish diet, or they like the super low fat diet, which is more of a Dean Ornish. So they say you shouldn't be eating these oils. You shouldn't be, you know, eating these healthy fats. And it's very difficult to compare diets because there's so much bias in all these studies. So for example, that 7-country studies that I showed you that showed as fat increases, so does the risk of heart disease. Well, you know, they didn't account for sugar intake. And a lot of the countries that had more fat had more sugar. And they didn't count for obesity. And so a lot of the countries, you know, there was a correlation with obesity. It's impossible to tease out which component is which. And so even now there's controversy about which diet is best. But I think last year we made a big step forward because a trial came out last year that was designed to address the bias. Okay, and it's called the Preventable study, and instead of studying populations, it took a group of people, thousands of people, and it divided them into 3 groups. And one of them was on a Mediterranean diet. I don't think I have this. One of them was on a Mediterranean diet with 1 liter of olive oil a week added to it. 1 liter. One of them was on a same Mediterranean diet with a handful of nuts, and encouraged nuts. And one of the third group was on a low-fat diet. And it followed these people for 5 years. And it said, well, what's better, Mediterranean diet or the low-fat diet? And it's the best study on diet that's ever been done. And this study came out in 2013. There's a 3 over there. And it made headlines because this was big news. So this study, this is the New York Times, and describing the benefits of the Mediterranean diet. Both groups in the Mediterranean diet had a significant benefit over the traditional low-fat diet. Okay, so this really added a lot of power, okay, to the points that Walter Willett has made over the years. They showed over 5 years that the risk of cardiovascular disease went down 28 to 30% with this Mediterranean diet. 28 to 30%, so a really significant impact of eating a diet like that one and that recent heart plate. And this is what their diet, this is kind of the Mediterranean diet is the diet of that plate that I just showed you. It includes olive oil, nuts, lots of fresh fruits, lots of vegetables, fish, legumes, sofrito, which is a sauce made of vegetables, basically, fried in oil, kind of a base, white meat, and wine. And what they discouraged was soda, baked goods, spread fats, butter, and red and processed meats. So that diet, you know, kind of the things we're talking about, now proven and really a good rigorous trial to be really an excellent cardioprotective diet. I put this in, this is the second last slide, just to remind people, it's not just how well you eat, it is how much you eat. And ultimately, a calorie is a calorie in the body. And so if you ate like all broccoli, but a lot of it, you could get fat on just broccoli. So you have to balance. You have to balance what you take in with what you put out. Okay, and this is weight gain if you take in more than you put out, and that's weight loss. So if you want to lose weight, it's a little different equation. And you can measure how many calories you put out. There are formulas out there. They take into consideration your age and your activity. They take your basal metabolic rate, and then they supplement it with your activity, and they tell you how many calories you're burning a day, and you can use that to figure out how many calories, that you can take in to equal or lose or gain weight. So, in conclusion, diet is a major contributor to chronic disease, particularly heart disease in the country. Improving your diet can have tremendous health benefits. We showed a 30% decrease with this Mediterranean diet in this study, but other studies, if you combine it with lifestyle, with exercise, have shown as much as a 70 to 80% decreased risk with diet and lifestyle. Eating right, it's easier and it's less complicated than many people believe. We've made it complicated. The experts have made it more complicated than it is. Limit the 4 things we talked about, okay? Saturated fats, added sugars, grains, and salt. And this is the Harvard website, but you can get there by just going to the nutritionsource.org. You don't have to use that website, but I think it's important there are many other websites referenced there, and so you can use that to find the one that suits you the best. Okay, so thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions. Well, so the question was, does venison or buffalo matter? And I think it does probably make a difference, because I think the saturated fat content of venison or buffalo is probably a lot less than the saturated fat content of these corn-fed cows on in these large agribusinesses. So I do think it probably makes a difference. So and if they don't say don't eat red meat, they say limit it. So most people are saying, red meat a couple times a week, 16, 18 ounces, max a week is kind of what you shoot for. Yeah. Well, I do think the mercury content of fish is a potential concern, and so I think it's important to know where the fish comes from, and I think that's a concern in Lake Michigan, and I think some people suggest limiting fish, salmon from Lake Michigan, and in pregnant women it's even more of a concern. In terms of fish, though, I think the cardiac benefits of fish in general far outweigh the risks of mercury associated with it. I mean, I see people die from heart disease every day. I don't think I've ever seen a case of mercury toxicity. So it is out there, and it is a theoretical risk, but I think it's young women, pregnant women, more than other people. Yes. Yeah, those food labels, I just think you have to really disregard the label, the food stamp, and look at what's in it. Yeah, because they have cereals that claim to lower immunity. The labels are out of control, and now there's regulation out there proposed to really take control of those food labels. But there was a Smart Choices label that got taken right off the market because it was so bad. I just don't think we can really trust those labels. Yeah. Maybe they took brown whole wheat and dyed it white. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's whole grains is a problem too, in that there are at least 5 different ways to put put the whole grain amount on a label. Okay, so what is good? What's a good amount of whole grains? Well, one is whole grain should be the first ingredient. Okay, that's one. One is the ratio of whole grains to sugar. Sugar should not be 10 times more than whole grains. Okay, so that's another area of just confusion is what really is, beneficial whole grains. So I think when it comes to something like that, you've really got to just look on the label, and this whole grain's the first ingredient. I think that would be the biggest, easiest thing. I don't know. I really, I can see that possibility. I don't know how well that's been studied. I don't think anyone in this literature makes a distinction between farm-raised and wild. I just don't know that that's been proven. I don't believe that's been proven. I don't make much of a distinction when I eat fish, but I do know that what they call farm-raised and what they call wild is completely bogus. And there was a couple of years ago, they went to sushi, restaurants in New York City, and they genetically tested the fish, and they had the wild salmon and they had the fresh salmon, and it was basically all the wild and the farm-raised, it was all farm-raised. So, yeah, that's a tough one. I don't think that's an issue, but who knows? Yeah, over here. Well, that's a good question. So there's a couple things. I think if you eat right, in general, then you don't need vitamins. Now, I would say that we frequently say one multivitamin a day in a patient with heart disease is a very reasonable thing to take because it's not going to hurt you. Okay, and the American Heart Association did recommend a multivitamin a day. For a while, we thought, well, B12 is protective, folate's protective, B6 is protective, omega-3s are protective. One by one, as those things have been studied, every one of them has not been, benefit has not borne out. And so I think there's no proof, but it doesn't hurt. So maybe we just, is it just because we haven't done the right study? So what I don't necessarily like is people who come in on 8 supplements. They're on CoQ10, they're on all kinds of stuff. And I have to be very careful because these people are usually the healthiest people in my practice. Because not only are they taking supplements, they're exercising, they watch what they eat, they keep their weight down, and so they're doing great. But if I tell them I don't think their supplements are doing much for them, they get mad, because they like their supplements. But so I'm not a big fan of vitamins other than a multivitamin. I would say recently, a lot of people take omega-3s, fish oil, and we looked at all the fish oil studies and combined them in our current era, and there's no benefit, cardiac benefit of fish oil and that we have proven. And we used to recommend fish oil because it used to be recommended by the American Heart Association, but now it really isn't. And in those studies, in some studies, there was a small increased risk of prostate cancer with fish oil. And so if there's no proven benefit and there's a question about risk and there's certainly a cost, why take it? So I'm really kind of discouraging fish oil in most of my patients. I just say one other thing, and I'm coming to you. Aspirin is a big thing too, because we used to recommend aspirin for the prevention of heart disease, okay, in people without heart disease, and that recommendation has now also been questioned because they looked at all the aspirin studies. If you don't have heart disease, aspirin has no proven benefit, and there's a small risk of bleeding. So the Bayer just recently asked the FDA to approve their baby aspirin for prevention, and the FDA said no, because there's no proven benefit. Now, if you have heart disease, it's a whole different ballgame. You need to be on that aspirin. But for prevention as kind of a supplement, it's very controversial now.
But you're saying with heart?
Yeah.
Family.
No, those are legumes, okay? So it's a different class. The beans when I look at beans as a category that are protective, those 3 of the top 4 are, I can't remember for sure, but it's some type of red bean, and then again, red bean, navy beans, kidney beans, black beans, so it's different than green beans. Yeah. I mean, I think green beans would also be excellent for you, right?
Yeah, right.
Might be splitting hairs, yes. Well, I think if you're eating non-processed foods, so if you're having fruit and vegetables, and then you're going to stay well below it. And then, everybody's got to eat some source of protein. I think, if it's unprocessed, it's probably not going to have a lot of salt in it. So if you're eating these bean dishes and legumes, it's not. And I think probably the salt in chicken, red meat, and fish, even though there is a fair amount of salt in there, if it's not processed, it probably is going to keep you in that lower range too. Well, it turns out that the salt shaker is just a really small amount of salt in the diet. And you get the far most flavor from the salt shaker, and so, as opposed to putting all the salt in the food and then cooking it. And then it's kind of, you don't get the same bang for the buck. So I think it would probably be better to get rid of the salt in the recipes and add a little bit, a little bit at the table. I think, yeah, salt is salt, yeah. Yes? Yep. Yeah, so oatmeal is a whole grain. I think that squashing it, I don't think squashing it as opposed to the kettle cut or whatever, makes a big difference. I mean, I think that's going to happen when you chew it anyway. So probably doesn't happen, but it probably doesn't matter if it's before you chew it or afterwards. Yeah. Pork? Yeah. No, I think pork would, it advertised as a white meat, but probably classified as a red meat. Everything in moderation. I can tell you, I mean, so my personal thing is, so our diet, our base diet is like that plate. But there's probably not one of those foods that's high in all the bad things that I haven't eaten, at some point in the last couple months. So, everybody's different, but my thing is just moderation. Yeah. Oh. Okay, yeah, I should be repeating the question. She asked if someone's on Coumadin, should they be taking a vitamin that has vitamin K in it, a multivitamin that has vitamin K in it? And I said no, because that vitamin K is going to counter the effect of the Coumadin. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Great questions, and appreciate the interest.